I Origins is a movie based on past lives and reincarnation. I'm Mark Beale. I'm a spiritual therapies trainer and a past life regression therapist. So I'll explain this movie from my professional point of view. And I can use it as a relatable case study for past lives and spiritual awakening. I'll look at how the key scenes and the themes of the overall story compare to past life regression therapy in real life, and I'll sort out the facts from the fiction, simplification, and exaggeration, and I'll do this with full spoilers. So, quick plot recap. Scientist Ian and spiritually orientated Sophie are lovers. Then Sophie's killed in an accident with an elevator, and Ian goes in search of her reincarnation. The main character, Dr. Ian Gray, sets up a conflict of the scientific versus the spiritual. And this is a fairly scientific kind of a thing to do. Believe or disbelieve. Black or white. Prove I am right, therefore make something else wrong. This is not a story about believing one way or the other. It's more of a coming of age story. The origin story of maturing into a wider perception of self. The origin of I and the I am can be seen as beyond black and white. So Dr. Ian Gray comes to peace with life's gray areas. So far, I Origins is true to real life because many people's spiritual path does start when they go on a quest to try to disprove a spiritual point, but they do so with a sincere inquiring mind. They start in the mind, but then events hit the heart. They have their eyes open to spiritual truths. It's also the story of the origin of Salamina. Like all of us, her present life self has a karmic origination in the actions and events of her past life as Sophie. I Origins looks into the origins of eyes and presents as fact the idea that the physical eye's iris patterns are passed on, so you can identify a person's reincarnation by their iris. Is this true in real life? Simply no. Yet this idea is key to the plot. But the idea that consistent physical data is passed on is pure fiction. It's pure science fiction and spiritual fiction. That's simply not how it works. So consistent data is not passed on. But we could ask, is there anything that can be passed on? Actually, yes, there can be physical residues that are passed on, but these are the least common of the 4 types of residues. We can think of these as being from effectively 4 bodies. We have a physical body, a mental body, an emotional body, and a spiritual body. So firstly, the physical body. There can be residues and imprints that do follow on to the physical body, but they're inconsistent and they are by far the least significant and are the least common. Imprints tend to be made by significant and often traumatic events like a violent death. So a spear that kills us might come through as a birthmark on the skin, a birth defect, or an internal invisible syndrome with symptoms that don't have a recognizable cause in the physical realm in this life. Secondly, our mental body can carry over abilities that we can reconnect with as talents in a future life and memories as sounds and pictures. Thirdly is our emotional body. This is visceral. Now, we may see things with our physical body and store these as memories as our mental body, but they become significant when they have an emotional charge that's imprinted on our emotional body. Now, Dr. Gray consistently thinks that he's operating on a physical level of the body and in the realm of the mind with his mental theories. Yet, I Origins is also a story about the emotion of love. So why did Dr. Gray fall in love with Sophie? They are an unlikely pair, and mentally it doesn't seem to make much sense. His falling in love proves when he looks at Sophie, he sees her not with his mind, but with his heart and soul. Sophie's name means wisdom, opposing or balancing out Ian's knowledge. Ian has a sense that he's in love, but there's no way to measure or prove it scientifically. And no sense organ in the physical body that can pick up or prove love. Yet most humans accept love is real. Love of another may be the most widely acceptable form of spirituality. For Sophie, she instantly feels that they've known each other in past lives. Her activated emotional body leads her to her soul. Fourthly, we have the spiritual body. Love, romantic relationships, and relationships of all types are some of the main reasons why people come for past life regression therapy. Sometimes they want to explore the origin of their connection. Sometimes they want to therapeutically resolve any problematic aspects of their present life relationship. In real life, a person like Sophie may come for a past life session to consider the decision to marry and to improve the health of the relationship. She could also explore the reasons for their attraction and the reasons for their friction. Origins could have had flashbacks to their past life. They both could have had subtle spiritual insights that help them understand each other and live long together in this life. But it took gross trauma and death for them to get their lessons. People often assume that if you feel a strong connection to a lover in this life, you had past lives together as lovers. This is possible, but it's just as likely that in a past life session, Sophie would find out they had any other form of loving relationship, like mother-daughter, brothers, friends. A strong connection can be felt also between people who were past life enemies. And remember, as our love relationships develop in this life, someone who's a lover early in our life may turn to be a strong enemy later in our life. The person stays the same. They have not reincarnated, but our perception of them can vary between being a lover and being an enemy. A soul that is close to us over lifetimes can express times of love and hate, friend and enemy. In real life, a person like Ian might have come for past life regression sessions himself to overcome his grief and to come to peace with death and dying. It would be common to find that Sophie caused his death in a past life. He could see it as a karmic act requiring balance and therefore forgive himself, let go and fully move on to love again with Karen. Ian could have done past life regression quickly to get the same resolution that he found years later through finding her in her future life. In real life, I do have clients like Salamina who may come for past life regression therapy initially with the presenting issue of overcoming a fear like of elevators. They may bring up at the same time, oh, by the way, I also have this issue of committing in relationships. So it's very common that it looks like we have two distinct, separate issues, but in fact the root cause is the same. That kind of extreme, visceral fear or trauma can leave a serious imprint on the emotional body. It is very common that a fear or phobia is related to a past life trauma or a past life death. But let's examine some past life myths. Firstly, movies often depict reincarnations as looking very similar to each other. So we might ask, shouldn't Salamina look more like Sophie? Origins has given us the false matching irises idea, but this contrast and break from cinematic tradition is more accurate to real life. This idea of physical similarity is a myth. Physical bodies and ancestry pass on genetic traits. It's the spiritual body that reincarnates and continues karmic and spiritual lessons, and that is not connected to genetics and genealogy. Now, a second past life myth can be the idea that if they had vowed to spend their life together that day, then why wasn't Sophie reborn as Ian's child? That way they could have fulfilled that vow and spent their life together, just in a different role. People often overestimate the need to reincarnate with somebody who is a past life lover. The myth here is that anyone you have a romantic past life with means that you'll always be together and keep coming back to repeat that scenario. In fact, what continues is the karmic body. So the continuation required is not to repeat the relationship, but to complete the spiritual lessons, including learning to let go and move on spiritually. It's not about clinging to people and getting stuck to try to get physical and emotional comfort. Ian and Sophie likely already had many past lives together. To fulfill their karma and complete their spiritual lessons, they only need to meet for a few hours or days here. They don't need a lifelong father-daughter relationship. It's not impossible for lovers to be reunited and reborn in that way, but the way iOrigins deals with it is much more realistic. Thirdly, people might ask, why would Sophie choose to be born so far away in India? Wouldn't it make sense for her to be reborn in the United States, closer to where she was in her previous life? The movie is accurate, and the idea that it isn't comes from the myth that people should look the same, have the same romantic relationships, and live in nearly the same kind of place. It is possible we can have repeating patterns and may well be born close to where we were born before, but equally possible we can have balancing patterns where everything is quite the opposite. So iOrigins is accurate to show Sophie could well end up in India. And in real life it makes perfect sense that Ian's baby was a Midwest black farmer, as it was easier to find them on the database to complete that part of the spiritual puzzle, regardless of a lack of physical resemblance. It will reincarnate wherever it needs to learn its spiritual lessons. So it can make sense for Sophie to be reborn far away. But why India? She probably has other soulmates from previous births, including her parents as Sophie. So she can go there, meet them, and resolve other aspects of her karma. But from the point of view of this movie and of Ian, leading Ian to India helps him complete his spiritual lessons. Being in India can be a visceral experience. For Westerners, it's like being in another world. So India herself becomes another character that Ian needs to meet, that can expand his mental conditioning that he's only ever experienced in one culture. In real life, India is a place that has triggered and contributed to the spiritual awakening of many Westerners who have visited there. I personally lived in India and felt transformed by my experiences there. I lived there for 5 years, and it was there that I studied and qualified as a past life regression therapist back in 2006. India is quite unique in that it has many people that combine high-level scientific thinking and an inherent understanding of reincarnation, and their knowledge does not create an inner conflict with their wisdom. So alongside Salamina, a key person for Ian to meet in India is Priya. She articulates what Sophie and Salamina could not. In that conversation where Priya listens patiently to his beliefs, but she provides the game-changing response that he needs to hear when she quotes the Dalai Lama. iOrigins presents two different types of scientific tests to trace a person's reincarnation. I'll look at both these tests and see if they would be effective in real life. But firstly, do past life tests like this happen in real life? Yes, there have actually been many cases of people trying to trace a person's reincarnation. One example of this is tulkus. This is a Tibetan term for children who are reincarnations of senior teachers in Tibetan Buddhism. They need to be rediscovered as children, so senior monks visit families with young children to find those who may have been their own teacher, and they give them tests. This process is shown in the Martin Scorsese movie Kundun, which is about the Dalai Lama, who is a soul in his 14th incarnation, taking that role as a Tibetan spiritual leader. When the 13th Dalai Lama died, senior monks took his personal possessions along with other random items to see if a prospective child could pick out his old belongings. Now, the Dalai Lama has overcome a karmic need to reincarnate, but consciously chooses to come back to the same place and people to teach the Dharma, and sometimes before he passes away, he'll give those that will look for his next incarnation clues as to where he will consciously choose to reincarnate. Tibetan Buddhism speaks of a continuum of consciousness, or a mind stream emanation, to ensure reincarnation is not perceived as a persistent, continuing self or soul. This clarifies that a karmically driven spiritual body may continue for some time, but our physical, mental, and emotional bodies are ever-changing and are impermanent. The first test in iOrigins was conducted by Dr. Simmons on Ian and Karen's baby. It involved showing the baby photographs and tracking the eye movements and emotional reactions of the baby. Reactions that are an automatic, subconscious reaction to stimuli. Some images are infused with emotions, visceral reactions that warn or protect us, like a fear, or the smiling face of our loved one, a soulmate we're born into this life for, so we get a sense of recognition when we see them and meet them in their next physical form. Dr. Simmons' test is well structured and clean, and similar to the tests run in Tibetan Buddhism. The second test by Dr. Gray, however, is poorly structured and heavily contaminated. It was ironically very unscientific. However, I don't think this is being a failing of the movie. In fact, in many ways, this is quite true to life, because there are a great many studies that think themselves scientific as they test spiritual or psychological matters, and they come up with authoritative sounding negative conclusions. But if you look at their source material and their structure, you can see that many of them have very fundamental and pretty obvious flaws. Dr. Simmons' good test measured subconscious responses while the subject was feeling comfortable and isolated from others. Dr. Gray's test had the subject, Salamina, making essentially a conscious choice while she was uncomfortable in Dr. Gray's presence. It is vital to have a calm, clear, and confident state. In order to do past life regression therapy, I first need to be in rapport with myself, with my client, and with the modality itself, and stand by it. Then as a therapist, I use hypnosis to help my client get into deep rapport with themselves and to access their own deep inner wisdom. Dr. Gray did the opposite of all of this. He himself was in an anxious state. He passed this on to the girl. He was not in rapport with himself or the girl or his own test. Everything he did pushed her anxious, conscious mind to the forefront and her wise, subconscious mind to the background. Dr. Gray embedded himself within the test, therefore affecting its outcome. Salamina was looking to Dr. Gray, the authority figure, for cues on what might be the right answer. He could make subconscious gestures or eye movements he wouldn't be aware of that would subconsciously guide Salamina to pick things like the picture of Sophie that he is drawn to. Picking up on these cues, Salamina may second guess and override her initial gut reactions. Giving running feedback during the test itself amplified her nervous state, leading her to more conscious second-guessing, reducing her confidence and reducing her connection to her peaceful, wise inner self. The options he gave her were weak. He says incorrect, but that's not a good one. They're three similar-looking flowers. Sophia herself may not have got 100% on this test if she'd taken it 10 years later. Trivial images with no reason to imprint on the mind have no place in that test, and they warp the score. It needs to be something visceral and significant. Dr. Gray barely recognizes how poor his own test is, but the movie does. Now it does move us to present a non-trivial trigger event, which is the climax and the highlight of the movie. I found the emphasis on iris imprints and the weak science and flawed experiments frustrating, even if this had a place in criticism of some scientific method. But it's the artistry of the depiction of the final elevator scene that, for this movie, is relieving and redeeming. The acting of the child, the Radiohead soundtrack, and this culmination to the story all left me with chills down the spine and a lump in my throat. The film itself created now a visceral and real emotional moment that comes with the insight that yes, this is true. This is how reality works. And creating that experience, that moment, is what good art is all about. We share with Dr. Gray the recognition that finally he's found a true test. Salamina's reaction is a subconscious response, not a conscious choice. She was not trying to get the right answer to a trivial image. She had a visceral reaction based on a life or death terror that originated in her past life as Sophie. It burst through the barriers of her current physical mind and body with a deep scream from her emotional and spiritual bodies. Now, in real life, this is very much how past life regression works. I often work with a client, regress them to a past life, and as we explore the narrative of events, even in a deeply relaxed hypnosis, the client will start breathing heavily and have a visceral emotional reaction. It's common to trigger chills and blissful peace as we get an insight into the origin of serious issues that block them in this life. The insights can also come with tears of joy to know the truth and to be set free of the past by that truth. I appreciate this movie most because it does a great job in replicating this rarely portrayed moment that is at the core of what past life regression therapy is all about. So tell me in the comments, how did this pivotal moment of the film impact you? Did you get a shiver of recognition of truth? So what happens after the film is over? Salamina's name is also significant. It means peace, completeness, contentment. Salome is also the name of a Christian female saint who witnessed the resurrection of Christ. So this choice of name suggests to me that finding her reincarnation is the completion of the story. Ian may have worked with Priya to ensure Salamina was looked after and financially supported her from a distance, but let her live out her destiny in India. But Ian's path with Sophie was essentially complete in that moment. In real life, during past life regression, people tend to recall the scenes as if they're watching a movie. What makes it feel real for them is the emotional connection that they can have, the imprint on the emotional body. Yet there's still a peace and a detachment. This comes back to the key question of who or what exactly reincarnates. It's a bit of a simplification to say that Sophie reincarnated as Salamina. Now, some movies portray the myth that a reincarnation is simply a continuation of personality, and I deal with this in the movie Om Shanti Om. Ian did not reunite with Sophie. The body, mind, and personality of Sophie died. Meeting Salamina is more like meeting the child of Sophie's actions. Karma means action. Sophie is the karmic spiritual origin of the one that can say, I am Salamina. The lesson Sophie gave Ian in the end was not that once people die, you can trace them and go find them again in their next life by matching up their iris patterns so you can continue to be together. Her teaching is that this life in this body gives us a precious opportunity to connect not just to our mental, but also to discover our emotional and spiritual body to its depths, and to connect with the spiritual bodies of those around us in this present moment and be more loving because of it. So Ian's lesson is not to cling to the past and a past lover, but to come back fully into the present and be more loving and present with Karen. So let me know in the comments what kind of visceral physical reaction or mental thought reaction or emotional reaction or spiritual reaction did you have to I Origins? Did this movie influence the way you perceive past lives and reincarnation? Have you had past life regression sessions, recall, or experiences that have caused you to adjust or expand some of your beliefs or perceptions of the world that we live in? If so, share some of your stories in the comments. If you've got any questions about past life regression therapy as a modality or past lives and reincarnation, also ask some questions and we can discuss those in the comments. If you found this video too entertaining, check out my educational videos on YouTube or at my website, the Past Life Awakening Institute. I have foundation courses to learn about hypnosis, hypnotherapy, past lives, spirit releasement, And I have certification courses to gain experience in these fields and become qualified through extensive assignments and one-to-one video calls that we have taking you through every step of the process. If you're interested in online sessions in past life regression or spirit releasement therapy, check out my website, the Past Life Awakening Institute, to book an online session. Check out some of these other videos that cover past life regression, spirit releasement therapy, between lives therapy, hypnosis and hypnotherapy, all based on other spiritual movies. Thanks so much for watching.